Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Successful Hybrid Work, Now and for the Future. My name is Ted Hulsey. I'm CEO of IronPath and your host for today's event. First, let's go through a few housekeeping items. All participants are in listen-only mode. Today's session will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. Thank you for joining in for the live session. Please submit your questions as we go along, and we'll try to address them on the fly. There will be a dedicated Q&A section at the end. At the end of the presentation. Finally, we will send you a brief 1-minute survey at the conclusion of today's event. Please share your feedback. Today's webinar is brought to you by a consortium of IT service providers serving your local community. Thank you to our sponsors. ACCI is headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. Amnet is based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. IT Synergy serves the Phoenix and Denver metro areas. And Segacint is headquartered in San Jose, California, serving Silicon Valley and the greater San Francisco Bay Area. Now let me introduce our speakers. First up is Ed Correia. Ed is the founder and CEO of Segacint Technologies Incorporated, a 21-year-old IT management firm focused on risk reduction, particularly around data security. Ed has over 43 years of experience as an IT professional serving both large enterprises and SMBs. Ed and the team at Segacint focus on providing the same comprehensive IT services that large corporations receive, but scaled for small and mid-sized businesses of 20 to 200 employees in Silicon Valley. Ed, welcome. And next up is Michael Kokenauer. Michael is the founder and CEO of IT Synergy. He has over 25 years in the IT field. Michael's been recognized as a Microsoft MVP, as well as having earned certification as a certified ethical hacker and as an investment advisor, certified compliance professional. Michael and his firm help their clients manage cybersecurity risks and stay compliant with key industry and government regulations. So welcome, gentlemen. I'm anxious to turn the ball over to Ed here in a moment, but we want to start today's conversation with a little bit of a discussion around some of the mega trends that are really impacting organizations of all sizes, and then we'll kind of get into the meat of the conversation. So the first one is, we've been through a pandemic. I think when we talk amongst ourselves with IT service professionals, I think the view is at the beginning of the pandemic and really through the first year or two, the effort was primarily like a triage effort. How do we get people out of the office? How do we keep people working? How do we enable remote work? But there wasn't a lot of thinking. I mean, this was a crisis, and there wasn't a lot of thinking around, how do we make it perfect? How do we make it world class? How do we make this the best possible employee experience? But I mean, I think thankfully, I think there's a general consensus we're entering the post-pandemic phase. Things are getting back to normal. But what's really going to never change is that remote work is a foundational way organizations will staff employees and get contribution from workers wherever they live. And working from home is never going away. It's a mega trend. It's here. This article in the Wall Street Journal the other day caught my eye, and I just thought this quote was kind of priceless. And the article was exploring how hard it is, or for some organizations, for many organizations, to get employees to go back to normal and to come back into the office. There's plenty of people who love the office. There's plenty of people who believe that that's where they're most productive. That's where they're most focused. There's lots of people who like the splitting their time and having a bright line between work and home. But for a lot of people, they've had commutes, they've had long commutes, they've had office experiences they didn't like. And I just thought this quote was kind of priceless. And the guy said, "You're not going to get me on the train for 2 hours for free bagels." So the theme of this article is that lots of organizations are having trouble getting people just to go back to normal. And the reality is we're not going to just go back to normal. Things will rebalance. Office life, office-based collaboration, certain companies will, kind of maybe go back to their old normal, but most won't. And remote work is really here to stay. The second mega trend really is that video-based collaboration is foundational to business work today. I mean, I can tell you, like every single call I've been on where somebody's trying to sell me something in the past 12 months, 18 months, single salesperson, we're on Zoom, we're on Teams, we're on GoToMeeting, and video cameras are on. So even collaboration and kind of business meetings between people who don't know each other very well, video is the standard. And when you look at the data, it's just kind of amazing. I mean, Zoom literally in 2 years grew their top line revenues by 8x. I mean, that's astounding. They went from something in the 300 million a year range to nearly $2.7 billion in revenue in 2021, in calendar 2021. So, and then Microsoft Teams is growing like a weed as well. And Microsoft announced in February that in 2022, they're experiencing 270 million daily active users of Teams. So it's video-based collaboration is huge. Ed's going to talk about that in greater detail. And then the topic Michael's going to really zero in on is the expanded attack surface. When there is no more corporate perimeter, where people are working wherever, remote work is just work, and security needs to be everywhere. And we really need to think about identity as the foundation of cybersecurity, meaning, is the person who's trying to access your application, access your corporate data, access your cloud-based servers, is that person the person they say they are? And are they that, you know, authorized employee who's trying to access it, or is somebody trying to hack or crack or compromise your network in some way? And so this was, you know, Gartner identified 2 of their big trends to watch for 2022 is remote work is just work, and identity first security is foundational. So with that, those are just some introductory remarks, but now let me turn things over to Ed, who will take us from here. Okay, Ed, we can see your slides well.
Oh, good. Wow. Because the pop-up that allows me to do that disappeared very quickly.
All right, we're good to go.
Before I get into my presentation, I'd like to share openly that my company has lived what we're about to present and share with you. In order to keep my employees safe from the pandemic, we raced to get everyone to work from home. It seemed the best way to keep everybody from infecting each other in a tight IT environment. Over the following months, we implemented several solutions that you're going to hear about, and honestly, I'll share which ones of these I chose for my company. Eventually, we ended up ending our office lease. I was very much against it initially, but we found that work from home worked well for us. The employees loved it. And today, I have half of my employees residing outside California, Silicon Valley, and several are located in other states. And I hadn't updated Ted yet, but we now count ourselves as a national company because we've got clients in many other states, all because of our embracing of the work from home or hybrid workforce. So we'll take it away. But as the advertisements say, your mileage may vary. So there are lots of advantages and disadvantages to a hybrid workforce. Employers like it because they need smaller offices with less square footage. I mean, let's be honest, they're going to save money, so they like that. Employers are happier because they don't have a commute. They get to save money on gas. Frequently, they tell me that they have a better work-life balance, and often they feel like they get to choose where they want to live. We had one employee who, when we embraced this, he decided to move to Michigan. So, you know, more power to him. It made him happy. But there are also a number of pitfalls with work from home and hybrid work environments. From a human perspective, maintaining connections with people is crucial. You don't want them to feel isolated, disconnected, and forgotten. And boy, do we work hard on that area. Communication needs to continue and actually increase beyond where it was when everyone worked in the office. The company's culture and values need to be maintained and stressed frequently. Encouragement, coaching of remote employees. I mean, we have one-on-one video chats with employees, each employee weekly, to make sure that they're in alignment, they understand what needs to be done, and that they're important to us. So it's interesting, we trade one thing for the other. We go from a smaller office footprint, but we have to step up our human engagement. From a business work perspective, the employees need to be continually reminded and shown, what is our company focused? What am I supposed to be doing? Who's doing what? How are we interacting? What are the other partners in my group doing? They need to see this. And how am I going to work? And where is my work? The bottom line is, how can we succeed in a work from home or hybrid work environment? And how can we make it easy for them? So I have 3 solutions that I'm going to share with you. So solution number 1, I want to add a preface. This solution number 1 is about cloud file options. However, please note that a physical server that you may be used to in your office, a cloud file server can do everything that it did. The difference is the cloud solutions have made remote access very, very easy. You can now access that data on most any device, anywhere in the world, as long as you have a good internet connection. However, as Michael will say in his program, this has created major security issues. Just because you use a cloud file option doesn't necessarily mean that it's secure. It needs to be secured. So cloud file options, there's a number of them out there: Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Microsoft SharePoint, Dropbox, Box, Ignite, and many, many others. The key objective here is to make easy access to a central repository of your files anywhere. The challenges here are going to be internet. If an employee has bad internet services, then the cloud solution is going to be very painful if it will work at all. Security, ensuring that those cloud files are secure, I think that's job 1. My rule is that anything accessible via the internet must also be secured with 2-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Mike will talk more about this. Access, you're going to need to control who can access what, and when an employee departs, make sure you can revoke those access permissions. Absolutely crucial. The architecture of setting up one of these cloud solutions is incredibly important. You don't want to end up like a junk drawer where everything's just thrown in there. You want some logical structure set up behind it. My preferences, I'm a Microsoft guy, I admit it. Microsoft OneDrive and SharePoint are both exemplary solutions. They're both intertwined. If you get Microsoft's M365, you get both. OneDrive is typically for a person's personal work files, and the SharePoint is a superset of that with all the company information. If you're looking at a cloud file solution, don't be sucked in on the price in the beginning, because often it's not a complete solution. You need to make it a complete solution, and often what looks to be more expensive in the beginning can actually turn out to be cheaper in the end. Number 2, video conferencing options. Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, these are the 3 biggest players in the area. I admit I like Microsoft Teams, and we were not an early adopter of it, but the objective is create a more personal connection. I am making very few phone calls these days. Almost everything is done via a video interaction. The challenges, again, the big one, internet. If your internet is bad, video communications is also going to be bad. You may have to upgrade an employee's connection if they're going to use that. The device's video quality also matters a lot. I see people using cheap laptops and using the camera that's built into it, and you get a grainy, very poor quality image. So we have to think about the tools that we're using to make this possible. The last caveat here I added was we use Zoom and Teams. Why do I use both, you ask? Glad you asked. I find that Zoom for a non-technical person is easier outside the company. So I use Zoom all day long when I'm talking with prospects and clients. We use Teams almost every hour of the day within our company, and people will pop up and have a chat with me and things are going on. Teams, the video that's built into the Microsoft Teams is fantastic, but I do find that there's a little more challenge with people who are not familiar with that yet, and so I want to make it easy on them. Next, communication platforms. Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, and Slack are the biggies in this area. The objective is to create a repository for text communication and file sharing. We want to make it really easy for the employee to find their communications and their coworkers and continue to talk. The benefits here, if we choose the right product, is that communication can be increased. Records of what is discussed are documented and they're accessible later. Work groups can be created so that a work team can focus on their tasks and collaborate. My God, my engineers are always in certain channels chatting away about how to resolve a specific issue. I'm seeing that productivity has increased because of this. One-on-one engagements, we can open up a chat session with an individual and talk about their issues or what we're trying to do with them. And I find that it really deepens the relationship because the communication is so easy. Files can be shared and retained. I added a little asterisk next to retain because the files are retained in SharePoint. Again, Teams is also a subset of the SharePoint, but getting workers familiar with how to save files in an organized, structured manner in the cloud can be challenging. Something like Teams, where you're going, and you'll see in a demo in a moment, where you can create work groups and people are saving files in those work groups. This is a great introduction to how to save files in the cloud. And since it's already built on Microsoft SharePoint, you're already there. And when they go into the SharePoint app to look at their files, like, oh, they're already in the proper locations. So Teams makes it easy. And bottom line, productivity will grow tremendously. This is, and I'm going to shift so I can use the laser pointer. This is Slack. Slack was one of the early introductions to this environment of creating a communications platform. You're going to see, and I'll turn on my laser pointer, little community areas and channels of what's going on. And if in this specific area here, we're in social media, we can see the conversations that are going on. People are uploading documents and there's a record of things. I like to create channels based on functionality within my business. So I'll create maybe a finance department, maybe an IT department, a recruiting department, et cetera, and people get used to going into these areas. You can also add or block people from being able to see it or participate in these different areas. Slack is really nice. I have to admit that once Teams came out, I feel like it blew Slack away. This is Microsoft Teams. So right off the bat, where's my pointer? We have this column here, which is kind of where you start for your activities. Here, it's telling me somebody wants to chat with me. Here, if I click on this, which relates to this area, these will be groupings, your team groupings where conversations are occurring. You can have your calendar. This is syncing with your Outlook. And sometimes I'll forget if I have a meeting and I'll click on the calendar here or click on activity and it'll warn me that I have a meeting coming up in a moment with some employees. I can take calls. By the way, Microsoft Teams can integrate with Microsoft's phone service so that this could be your main interactive portal. So you could be doing not only chat, video, but voice as well. And then there's the file repository. So again, because we're in the Teams area here, what we're seeing is separate different teams. In this demo from Microsoft, there's a security operations team, there's a sales and marketing team, public relations, probably, marketing, a sales team, et cetera, et cetera. And then when we're in the general, we can see the things that are going on. Up at the header here, you have the choice of looking at what are the posts, the text information that's going on. We could click on files and see the files that the people are sharing. And you can add in other applications like a wiki, and there's dozens of other apps that can be plugged in. Right now at my company, we're using it pretty much plain vanilla, and it is doing far more than we ever dreamed was possible. So final thoughts. Make a commitment to a standard. Don't try and use, if we're going to go cloud files, don't try and also have an internal physical server. Go all in. I like the idea of go big or go home. If you're trying to use competing platforms, you may confuse your employees. If you try to use these multiple platforms, you're probably going to fail. So don't do it, and go for the win. You may not all be in the same office, but you can work like you're there. And in our case, we were able to work better because we went in a direction that I didn't initially want to do. Anyway, Ted, that's my presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ed. I just want to, double click a little bit on this idea that there's a concept, there's a concept of network effects, right? So when everybody's on the same page, when everyone's using the same system for something like chat-based communication or video-based communication, there's learning curves, people get savvier, people know where stuff is supposed to be, where it lives, and really having an internal standard for your organization drives those network effects. And then, to Ed's other point, hey, stay nimble. If you've got people on your staff who have to do a lot of external collaboration, or they sell to public, people outside the organization, and Teams seems like a better option, use that as well. I mean, it's you want to have standards, but you also want to really maximize this technology and be sensible about who the audience is. Who, in fact, are you collaborating with is really what drives which platform you should be using. So what I'm going to do is, Ed talked about how all of this great technology works together, how it enables collaboration, how it enables companies to work across huge geographical boundaries. I'm going to talk first about a lot of the problems, because I still see this. I mean, I literally just had a call on the weekend with, it's a family related matter, but like literally it was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting, and the first 20 minutes of the meeting were consumed with a bunch of technical problems because, in the words of the person I was collaborating with, my husband moved the router. You moved the Wi-Fi router, and she couldn't get Zoom going. And then we had to then switch over to FaceTime, and even that was still working poorly. And then we just ended up having a voice call at the end of the day. So the reality is, in my perspective, lots and lots of companies have kind of thrown their staff in at the deep end. They've sent them home to work. They've kind of shrunk the budget. They haven't really thought about what people need. And there's lots of people struggling. There's lots of people out there who are just barely limping along in this new brave world we're in. And there's lots of problems. And let me just kind of touch on some of the problems that I see day to day working with folks. And then let's go to what we think, everybody should be thinking intentionally, and build a checklist. What are the things you can do to upgrade the experience for your employees so that they're more productive and they're happier, and you're showing that you care about them and you care about their own personal success. So first thing is spotty connectivity. Happens all the time. It's a nightmare. It's like, if we're going to be doing business and video collaboration, you have to have rock solid internet. So we'll talk about how to make sure that's highly likely. A lot of companies have simply sent their employees home with their laptop without any extra peripherals or anything. It's just they don't really have the right computer setup to really be very productive in their home office. This hipster gentleman with his AirPods, he's probably the guy you can't hear on many of the video conferences you're on. So think about audio. Audio actually, at the end of the day, is more important than video in many collaboration scenarios. Poor lighting, if you've got staff that are like doing external collaboration or producing webinars or joining virtual trade shows, get them a ring light. I have a ring light here. I do several webinars a month, and I, let people invest a little bit so people can look their best. Basic cameras is another problem. Ed mentioned this, the basic camera that's built into most laptops, they're not good enough really, and you can't move them around, you can't angle them where they should be. So think about cameras, and then think about ergonomics for your staff as well. So let's talk about what some of the solutions. So those are all the problems. Let's talk about some of the solutions. So I'm gonna give you kind of 6 areas where I think you can kind of invest some budget, invest some effort, talk to your IT service provider and say, hey, that really caught our attention, or that's a problem we're seeing. Can you guys solve that? And then let's look at where we can invest. So the first one is Wi-Fi connectivity. Today there is a whole class of product which are called Wi-Fi mesh networks. And the way these things work is you usually have the high-speed internet connection in the home, and then you have a router or enterprise-grade firewall, which serves as like a home base. And then you can array Wi-Fi access points that dynamically organize in a mesh and communicate back to the base. And everybody has their own preferences. I've literally tested all three of the products here below: the Orbi class of product from Netgear, the Google product, and the Eero, which is now owned by Amazon. They all work great. I happen to like the Orbi product from Netgear. It's the best. It has the best and most stable performance, very, very high throughput. This is not, yes, you can buy these at Best Buy, but like, this is premium Wi-Fi equipment. This is stuff where you're going to be spending a couple $100s probably to correctly outfit a home. And this is kind of, to me, table stakes for your employees' home office environments. The other dimension to it is, what are you doing about the actual firewall or router? And there's lots of choices on the market. I've probably identified the 5 what I would consider either business grade or enterprise grade firewall brands at the top. Another couple very important things to do is so the reason you want these is because they're more secure. They have more security features. They're easier to manage, either by a corporate IT department or by your IT service provider. Many of them are able to be organized in a global management console. So if you say have 30 or 40 employees and you have 10 people who work from home, literally your IT department or your service provider can have like a global view of all of this network infrastructure in a single pane of glass in a console to understand uptime and reliability of the network and make sure everybody's connected in real time. So invest in quality networking hardware, even in the employee home office. A couple other things to think about. I think one of the participants in today's webinar did ask a question about giving employees a subsidy to get their own high-speed internet connection. I think that's a great solution. Most companies should also be just reimbursing their employees for their home internet costs and encouraging them to buy the highest speed possible, potentially, and allowing them to expense that back. If they're working from home, in my opinion, from a equity perspective and from a legal perspective, that's a company cost. And so companies should be reimbursing the high-speed internet costs of employees who are home-based workers. The other alternative is you could actually put it on the corporate account and manage that by your own IT department or IT service provider on a formal basis. And what I'm going to talk about segmenting a network, but one way to segment a network is you can literally have 2 different internet services coming into a home. You could have a cable modem and say, hey, household, put all your household stuff on that. All the television and all the multimedia today, all the gaming is on that network, and then have a dedicated internet connection for work. It's affordable enough, and as we've talked about, this is work. This is your new rental expense. I mean, this is, this is not free. There's no free lunch for high quality remote work for organizations, and it's a business expense, and companies should be enlightened and forward thinking about investing ahead of the curve here. Another thing to do is you can do dual WAN connections. I actually have this set up. During the pandemic, I started doing, basically the number of webinars I produced, quintupled, let's call it, in the matter of months. And so I actually have a Comcast high-speed cable modem connection, and I have an AT&T fiber to the curb, fiber to the home, fiber connection coming into the household, because before the pandemic, about once a quarter, Comcast internet would go out for some inexplicable reason for about 3 hours once a quarter. And to me, that's just not business grade. I can't produce webinars and do all this sort of stuff and have any sort of downtime. So one of the options is there is gear on the market. I happen to use a Meraki unit to do it, where you actually connect the high-speed modems from each service provider to a single network node, and then bring those dual connections in an active fashion into the household. And then just this graphic from the Linksys FortiGuard series. The other thing to do is just segment the traffic. Make sure with your Wi-Fi network, you can put all of the household television and gaming stuff on one network, virtual network, and another onto the private home network. So let's keep trucking, but quality connectivity. And then proper computing. I think one thing we need to think about with knowledge workers is pretty much laptops are the standard. If you have staff that's going to bounce between the office and their home office, maybe they work 3 days from home, maybe they come into the office 2 days a week, you got to give them a laptop. Laptops are more expensive than desktops, but they have so much more utility for everybody who cares about it, including the employee, right? So laptops nearly for everyone. If you do have staff that virtually, literally will never ever travel, you could probably get away with corporate desktops. But laptops for everyone, I think, is a really good principle. You need to pair those up with a docking station. I mean, this depicts a USB-C based docking station. So literally just one little cable plugs into this Lenovo laptop, and then you can add all kinds of peripherals, including 3 monitors, to this one laptop. And I think there's many scientific studies that show that when employees have multiple monitors, they can do all the sorts of things they need to do more productively with their computing environment. Let's remember audio. Audio is super important. People always underestimate this, and you have people limping along with lousy stuff. There are Bluetooth devices that can connect to both your computer and your mobile device. So it's with just a click of a button. Some people really like these Bose noise canceling things. People, in households when they're working from home, there's lots of distractions potentially because, people's houses maybe weren't designed to have a really robust home office, and the baby's crying in the next room over. So noise canceling headphones with a good mic with noise canceling could be the ticket. And then don't underestimate just sticking with wired. I use one of these really nice Sennheiser wired units when I'm on the road. It thing is crystal clear. It's a thing of beauty. It's perfect and just plugs in via USB. It's a rock star. So think about audio for your staff. And then last, before I turn things over to Michael, think about lighting and high def cameras. Your staff is collaborating externally. They're selling externally. There's the principle of equity. Some staff gets free bagels when they're in the office on Friday. What do the people at home get? Well, give them a high def camera so they can look their best and look their best with their prospects, or look their best with their business partners, or look their best on a company meeting. Think about lighting, ring lights. There's lots of different ways to configure ring lights. They are dirt cheap. They don't cost a lot of money. They work beautifully. You can even outfit road warriors with one of these things called a Lume Cube, which is just a little suction cup thing that pops on the back of your laptop. And then invest in high def cameras. This is the one from Logitech. It's actually the one I'm on right now. It was a splurge 2 years ago when I bought it. I mean, they've come down in price tremendously, but HD cameras with wide angle and high def are really quite valuable. So just think about like the pride you want your employees to have in their work, the pride everybody wants in their work, and help them look their best and do their best in their work. So with that, let me turn it over to a darker subject, which is cybersecurity, and hand the ball to Michael and talk to us a little bit about what you should be thinking about with cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Like, we've talked about all this great collaboration and everything that you and Ed have brought up, and now I'm going to bring it all to a screeching halt and make you afraid to go to sleep at night. So thanks for that intro, Ted. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity in a remote workforce world and some of the new things that you need to consider as we move into this new remote working environment, or as Ted said, kind of this isn't remote work, this is just work now. This is just the way it is. So what are some of the challenges that have emerged that are unique and new, given that a lot of our workforce has become now not office-based? So the first is many of our employees are now connecting and working on public and unmanaged environments and networks. And so it used to be back before pre-COVID, when we were all in the office, from a cybersecurity standpoint, a corporate IT standpoint, everybody was working in an environment that we controlled. And we could put security controls in place and configurations in place to protect them. And it was all kind of a very castled environment, so to speak, where we've got these big walls around it, and then we create this safe space for you to work inside of those walls. Well, now everybody's left those walls and nobody's sitting inside the walls anymore. And so that creates a little bit of a challenge for us, is how do we continue to protect our employees and our data even after they've left the security of the corporate walls? Next thing is a big challenge is proving identity. And we're going to talk about a lot of different elements related to proving identity, but specifically, let me give an example. Like, we've all heard the example about the bad guy, posing as your CEO or your CFO or whatever else and saying, hey, I'm in a meeting, I'm busy right now, but I have this important customer thing, and can you go buy some gift cards for me, or can you get this wire transfer out ASAP? I'm trying to close a deal, etc. And then after the funds are transferred and money is moved, you find out, yeah, no, that wasn't your CEO or your CFO. And in the old days, when we were all in the office, if I had gotten an email from my CFO that says, hey, I need you to do this or go buy some gift cards or whatever, I could have just walked over and said, like, did you just send me an email about buying gift cards? Like, that seems super weird. But now that person is not in the office. And so it's a lot more difficult to collaborate, and that creates some challenges around proving you are who you say you are. So we're going to talk about some of that. We've got to figure out now our corporate data has left the corporate walls. So again, as Ed talked about at the very beginning, where you've got a file server that sits inside your building, and that's where all of our data sits. Well, I can do all kinds of things as a cybersecurity professional to protect that. I can put it in a locked room, and I can put security around it and passwords and encryption and all these sorts of things. Well, now our data has left that environment. It's outside the corporate walls, and it's residing on your mobile device or your tablet or your laptop at home, whether that's a personally owned device or a company owned device or whatever else. And so as our data leaves that protection that we had in place traditionally, how do we continue to make sure that that data remains protected? Device ownership is a big one. Ted talked about, hey, you need to get your employee's laptop, but in the beginning of COVID, if you remember, if you go back a couple of years, I think initially a lot of us thought, hey, we need to send our employees home for a few weeks or a few months. And I don't think at the time any of us were envisioning that as a long-term or a permanent solution. And so employees a lot of times would just say, you know what, pandemic, I'm just going to go, I've got my computer at home, I'll work from that. Well, obviously now we're in a state where this is not a temporary solution. This is not just several weeks or several months. I mean, obviously people are going to stay in this state for a protracted period of time. And so if they were working on personal devices, again, whether that's a computer or a phone or a tablet or whatever else, there are different considerations depending on who owns the device. Obviously, for non-company owned devices, they're a lot more restricted, and employees are a lot less willing to let us do things to those devices in order to put protections in place. And so we've got to think about that. And then social engineering. The bad guys have also adapted to the remote work environment, but the bad guys have adapted in the way that you don't want them to adapt. And they recognize that you don't have the ability, as I mentioned earlier, to just walk down the hallway and say, hey, did you ask me for this? And so the bad guys realize that, for example, you're at home and you may be connecting to a VPN or connecting to a remote server or something like that. And so they are modifying their attacks. And what we're seeing out there in the threat landscape is they're starting to modify their tactics to take advantage of the way that people are working today. And so we've got to update employees on how to recognize these social engineering attacks and how they've adapted to the new remote work environment. So how should we adapt? Well, we've got to rethink our investments in security and specifically in cybersecurity. So as I mentioned the castle metaphor before, the old thinking related to security was I'm going to build a castle and I'm going to put big walls around it and I'm going to put a moat around it and I'm going to fill the moat with alligators and then I'm going to have knights standing at the top with hot tar that they can dump on people if they try to break in and all that sort of thing. Well, today, the cybersecurity model has really changed to a model that they call assume breach. And basically what that means is, in the old days, we used to work on, all of our efforts were focused on keeping people out of our network. And today that has changed. We now have to assume that they are going to get into the network. So it's not a matter of if the threat actors are going to break into your network, it is a matter of when are they going to break into your network. And when they do, how quickly are you going to recognize it? How much are you going to be able to mitigate whatever damage they're able to do? And how quickly are you going to be able to kick them back out? And so when we talk about rethinking your investment in security, you've got to start to invest in technologies that focus on those areas, recognition that an attack is in process, limiting the amount of damage that's happening, and getting the threat actors kicked back out of your network. That's where you need to start to prioritize investment rather than in that castle wall and the moat and the alligators and all that other stuff we talked about before. So because the work model has changed, the threat modeling needs to change as well. And so we need to start thinking about threats differently and responding differently and investing differently. And really what it comes down to at the end of the day is you got to start to think like the bad guy. So as Ted mentioned at the outset, I'm a certified ethical hacker, which I like to say means I have all the skills and training of a bad guy, but I use my powers for good and not evil. And what that allows me to do, and what you need to do as well, is start to think like the bad guys think. How are they going to take advantage of your network? What are they going to do? And then put things in place to stop that. So to that end, I'm going to talk about 5 steps that I'd really suggest you consider implementing today to adapt to this new work from home model. So the first is multi-factor authentication, or MFA. This is also sometimes referred to as two-factor authentication, or 2FA. To me, MFA has gotten to the point where it's now basic table stakes. You have got to turn this on. This is one of the single most effective things you can do against threat actors, because threat actors, generally speaking, like to launch their attacks remotely from Eastern European countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. And it's very difficult for them to do that, or significantly more difficult for them to do that if you have multi-factor authentication turned on. So what is multi-factor authentication? First of all, there are 3 possible factors, and you only need to have 2 of them to qualify as multi or 2-factor authentication. So the 3 factors are something you have, something you know, and something you are. The best example of multi-factor authentication that we're all familiar with is taking money out of an ATM. In order to take money out of an ATM, I have to have something, which is my debit card or my ATM card, and I have to know something, which is the PIN number. And unless I can marry those 2 pieces together at the same time in the same place, I'm not going to be able to take money out of an ATM. And so that's an example of multi-factor authentication. The third factor, which is a little bit less common, something you are, that's when you start doing things like eyeball scans or fingerprint scans or voice recognition, where it's something that is unique to the individual. And that can also be one of the factors in multi-factor authentication. It's becoming more and more common, and it's literally just a matter of turning it on. It is available almost everywhere that you log in online now, but you've got to go in and dig through your security settings and figure out where to turn it on. So it's available in Gmail, it's available with Apple, it's available with Facebook, PayPal, Office 365. Almost everything you use today has multi-factor authentication capability, but a lot of times it's just not turned on. And so you need to dig into your security settings and figure out how to turn it on. And then there are also different types of multi-factor authentication, good, better, best. So one that I would put in the good category is what we're all familiar with, where you go to sign into a site, you put in your username and password, and then they send you a text message with a 6-digit code, and you have to put in that 6-digit code. That's good. But the issue is bad guys can also duplicate your SIM card and intercept text messages and things like that. So a little bit better method is, a lot of us are now familiar with an app like a Google Authenticator or a Microsoft Authenticator that has the code already in there, and it cycles every 60 seconds. And so to log into the site, I have to have my username, my password, and then I put in the code off the app. That's better. But the best is to actually have an app that gives you a pop-up notification. So like a Duo is one application from Cisco, or Microsoft has an authenticator where when you go to log in, you put in your password, and then you get a pop-up on your phone that you have to acknowledge in order to allow the multi-factor authentication. Second one is data protection. The first is, we're now mobile. Our users are no longer in the office. And so when we think about mobility, I'm going to give you a bunch of alphabet soup here, which is MDM and MAM. That stands for mobile device management and mobile application management. So the problem is, as we talked earlier, depending on who owns a device, people don't want your spy tools on their personal devices. And that's a lot of times how employees interpret it when you say, hey, I'm going to install mobile device management on your personal cell phone or your personal tablet. So instead, what we have to start thinking about is protecting our data on the device and not the device itself. And so that's really what gets into the mobile application management. And so effectively what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve out a little container on your personal device, and I'm going to put my corporate data inside of that container, and I'm going to protect that container, but I'm not going to impact your device, and I'm not going to get access to your personal data, and I'm not going to be able to wipe out your pictures of your kids and all that sort of thing. I'm only concerned with what's inside that container, and I'm going to protect that. The next thing to think about is encryption. Windows has a tool called BitLocker that is included in every modern version of Windows that's out there. It's free, and it's just a matter of turning it on. So if you click the start button and just search BitLocker, you'll find it, and you can go in and turn that on, and that will encrypt the contents of the hard drive so that if a device is stolen or lost, the person who stole it or who comes across it will not be able to access the data on that hard drive. And then also a technology called Information Rights Management, or IRM, which is where we start to apply properties to documents depending on the sensitivity of the information in that document. And Microsoft even has some technology here that can allow us to automatically scan our documents and tag documents properly with critical data. So it can look for example, a social security number and tag it as confidential. And once it's tagged as confidential, that you can prevent your users from emailing that outside the company, for example, or you can allow them to view the document but not print it, or view it but not copy and paste the contents to something else. So all kinds of things you can do with this information rights management. But again, those properties get applied to the document rather than to a device or anything like that. So it makes it a little bit easier for us as a corporation to protect our information. Number 3, and this is probably right after multi-factor authentication for me in terms of priority, is patch early and patch often. So when a bad guy gets into your network, the very first thing they're going to do is scan for known vulnerabilities. Bad guys have a tool called Metasploit that allows them to get into your network and run this tool that will scan every device on your tool, and any patch that has been announced in the past umpteen years that you haven't patched, this tool will find it, and the bad guy literally just has to hit a button to take advantage of that vulnerability and compromise your data, your computer, and your network. So it's very, very easy for them to do. It's literally just a click away. And so if you don't have those patches installed, they're going to take advantage of that very easily. They're going to find it. So you need to stay up to date with your security patches, not just from Microsoft or Apple, but you need to remember all of your third-party applications as well. Java, Adobe, Google, your Chrome browser, all those things also have patches that need to be installed on a regular basis. And then don't forget your hardware devices as well. So your firewall has a patch that's installed. Even your home firewall has patches that get released. In the case of hardware, those are generally called firmware updates. And so you can go out to Google and search for firmware update for your home router, or any other, even printers have these things. Any of these devices all have patches. And so installing all those patches, not just software patches, but also third-party software patches for all the different software that's installed on your computer, and the hardware patches as well, all very important to keep that up to date. Identity management becomes much more important when it comes to remote work environment. When we're talking about identity management, what we mean there is proving that you are who you say you are. And so you need to, the best way to do this is to establish a single, what I call source of truth for your identity. And then once you've established that source of truth, so for example, when I say a source of truth for your identity, that could be like Microsoft 365, for example. That's where my username and password is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to then funnel all of my verification through that single source. If we use Microsoft 365, for example, I can then point all of my third-party applications to Microsoft 365 in order to prove that I am who I say I am. And so there are tons and tons of third-party applications out there that will allow you, instead of signing in with a username and password that is specific to that service, that will allow you to point your sign-in over to Microsoft. When it points your sign into Microsoft, you say, hey, I'm Michael Kokenauer. Microsoft validates that through a password, multi-factor authentication, everything else we're talking about. Then Microsoft hands back to that third-party software and says, yep, this is Michael Kokenauer. And then the third-party software allows me to do whatever I want to do. And so funneling everything through that single source. And then once you've done that, you can then start to build strong protections around that source. So if we go with Microsoft as the example, they have a lot of additional licensing that you can add to look for things like suspicious logons or logons outside the country, or I can even prevent logons from certain countries or from outside the United States or from outside North America or based on time of day. So there's lots of different things that I can do. Microsoft even has an artificial intelligence engine built where it can say, for example, let's say I sign on in Phoenix at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then I sign on in New York at 10:20 a.m. The artificial intelligence engine will go, wait a minute, there's no way he could have gotten from Phoenix to New York in 20 minutes. And so it will stop that login. And so I can build very strong protections around the place where my identity gets validated. The advantages of doing something like that is I get a single well-protected choke point rather than multiple disparate systems. So I don't have to say, well, you know, this password needs to be 8 characters long in this system, and this one can just be a PIN number, and this one makes me change it, and this one doesn't. I have everything in one single place, and I can build all my rules and all my protections around that single place. And then the other advantage it gives you is once I cut off the account at my single choke point or my single source of truth, that disables everywhere. So when an employee walks out the door, I cut off one thing and that employee is cut off everywhere. And then finally, you've got to invest in training. The easiest part of any system by far to hack is the human being. As a bad guy, that's the way that I'm always going to get into your system, is I'm going to hack the human being. And so the way to combat that is to invest in training, Teach them how to recognize illegitimate emails. That's a whole different presentation and topic, but there are some very specific tips that you can give people on how to recognize that an email is fake. You need to send phishing tests to teach them how to recognize these emails. And when they click on a fake phishing email, you can use that as an educational opportunity to tell them, hey, this is why you should have recognized this, and here's what to look for. You need to put some teeth in your training program. So we see a lot of people roll out training programs. When you roll out a training program, 75% of employees are going to do it, and the other 25% are just going to ignore you. So you've got to put some teeth in there. The most effective customers that we've seen will say, hey, if you don't do the training, we're going to write you up, we're going to suspend you, and eventually we may even terminate you if you refuse to do the training. So put some teeth in there. And then teach them about social engineering beyond just business email compromise, or BEC. So teach them how to recognize the gift card scams, or people calling them on the phone, or getting them to click on a website, all kinds of different social engineering. That all comes through education. The single greatest weapon against many of these attacks, these social engineering attacks, here it is, good old-fashioned telephone. So when you're in doubt, just pick up the telephone and ask the question, did you ask me to send those gift cards? Did you whatever? So with that, I will hand it back to Ted.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you, Michael. And we're going to get to people's questions. So questions, we got some time for formal Q&A. We got several very good ones in there. Add more. Let me just make two final comments. I was going so fast, I wanted to make sure I didn't rob Michael of any of his time, so I forgot my sixth investment area. So let me just mention it briefly. Think about the ergonomics of your staff's home office environments. Things like standing desks, ergonomic keyboards, ergonomic chairs can take care of your people on the one hand, and also keep you out of legal trouble, because like we said, remote work is work, and you are responsible for the workplace safety and health of your employees when they're on the job, sitting in their home office. So think about that. So lots of easy ways to make investments there. Just as a final offer for everyone who joined or listened in today's webinar, as Michael explored, there's lots and lots of different areas where companies maybe have not invested well enough in the recent past in their cybersecurity, and there may be looming issues. Or there may be areas where there's low-hanging fruit where you can take a next step to dramatically improve the cybersecurity posture for your organization. All of the sponsors of today's webinars are experts in cybersecurity, and one of the things we like to do with anybody who's considering adding an IT service provider to your list of vendors, or as a service provider, or maybe you're considering changing service providers, is to do a rapid security assessment. It's a really fast way to find out if you've got any really dangerous issues right now in your organization. Maybe there's gaps in how you're protecting your remote workers. A rapid cybersecurity assessment is the way to ferret out those challenges and quickly get them addressed. For anyone who's participating in this webinar series, we're offering it for $7.95 from all four of the sponsors. Please reach out after today's webinar if you are interested in it. Let's get to your questions. So let's just tackle, I think Sean asked about, is it common, or no, Roy asked about, is it common for companies to pay for the high-speed internet access for their staff? I think we kind of addressed that. And then there was a follow-on question, is what's a typical charge? Yeah, so I think Scott asks, if you don't mind me asking, how much do you reimburse employees? I would say the going rate is somewhere around 40 to 50 to 60 bucks to pay if you're going to pay for like 100% of the high-speed internet access for your employees. My wife's law firm, my wife works full-time from home, they pay for her home internet access and her mobile phone. And that's just how it goes. It's a cost of doing business. So I think that's a really big, important best practice. It's also a matter of legal issues, that those are real employee expenses that the employer is responsible for from a legal perspective. So it's not just like the right thing to do. It's not just, doesn't make just good business sense. It's also a legal requirement so that your employees are not carrying company expenses on their own book. Let's throw this one out there. So Sean wants to know, a lot of Microsoft products, Microsoft Teams, for example, will allow add-ins. What are good ones that allow for an increase in productivity versus something that could be distracting? And so I guess maybe just talk, I mean, Michael or Ed, just jump on this one. Talk to us a little bit about maybe the Microsoft 365 platform and all the different apps that are available in the platform that plug in nicely to some of the things we already talked about today.
Michael,
I can. Yeah, sure. I just real quick, a couple thoughts that come right off the top of my head. So first of all, I just want to point out something that's interesting from the question, which is, what can interrupt productivity? And one of the things I think that people need to think about in the remote work environment is what's the impact on the company culture? And I think that's something I know from my own perspective that we kind of underestimated. The significance of the impact on company culture of having people work remotely. And so I would just encourage people to not just automatically reject something because you think it may interrupt productivity because of the way that it can contribute to preservation of your culture. So for example, one of the things that we allow in Microsoft Teams is we allow people to send animated GIFs or animated pictures, which are all kind of funny jokes and that type of thing. And you could say, well, that's a waste of productivity. You guys are sending jokes back and forth. But the bottom line is if we were here in the office, like we want to have a fun company culture anyway. And so that's something that we would joke around with each other if we were here in the office. And so I don't want to necessarily shut that down. But then just real quick, I'll just give my favorite add-in that we've only started using recently with Teams, which I absolutely love, is a reminder add-in, which allows us, because one of the problems we have in Teams is somebody will say, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you check this? Whatever. And then 5 minutes later, I'm distracted and I forgot. And so this is an add-in that allows you to just type remind and when you want to be reminded, and it will come back up and pop back and re-message you like, hey, you said, you want to be reminded of this in an hour, a day, a week, whatever.
Sean, I wanted to just add in, I tend to think that I'm a big believer in controlling the applications that a company uses. The fewer applications on a computer, the better it's going to run. And similarly with these applications that are now allowing people to work, you want to control those. So I like Michael's idea of being receptive and willing to look at things that are suggested, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily let people run wild and install anything they want. It would be very easy to add things in that might not be secure or could be devastating to your company's productivity. So put some guardrails around it. Let people know that you're willing to examine those things, but control it.
Okay, two kind of just more housekeeping type questions. Joan wanted copies of the slides and Paul wanted us to fast or back up to the first security slide. Here's what we'll do. We normally only circulate a recording, a copy of the recording of today's presentation, but what we'll also do is we'll take all the slides, save them in as a single PDF file and circulate that to all registrants so you guys have that handy. I think this is one of those sorts of webinars where we covered a ton of ground. And there's a lot of it's almost like a checklist. Like you probably want to pick 4 or 5 of the things, or maybe 3 that really caught your eye or resonated with you, and you can go back to the slides as a way to kind of brush up on your checklist of ideas from today's session. So we will circulate copies of the slides as well. Sean has another question. This is kind of a technical one, but is a Citrix or a virtual desktop a version of MAM that might be better for employees that don't want company software on personal devices? So maybe Michael, why don't you kind of address virtual desktops?
Yeah, so I wouldn't really consider virtual desktops an MAM because as we talked about, MAM or mobile application management is really a method of creating a container inside of a device and then protecting the information inside that container. Whereas with a virtual desktop, you're basically giving them an entire PC. And so not really the same thing. But that's not to say that virtual desktops aren't effective or a bad solution or anything else. It's just not necessarily the same thing. Some of the challenges with virtual desktops, it depends on the type of business. Some of the more video intensive applications, CAD, that type of thing, can be more difficult to pull off in a virtual desktop environment. So you've got to make sure that it's a fit for your business. And then there's also the challenge of what happens when you're on an airplane. And does the virtual desktop have offline capability and that type of thing? So just all considerations to think about if you're thinking about a virtual desktop solution.
I just add a real quick caveat. I know we're up against the clock. I have grown to hate BYOD, bring your own device. I think before the pandemic, a lot of companies thought it was a great way to save money. People will buy their own computers and will do it. As Michael pointed out, people do not like us putting our security software on their personal devices. If a company is not going to provide a company-owned and secured device, that employee on their personal device should work through a virtual desktop that is secured.
Right. There's really no free lunch. I mean, if you go the route of where a personal device is going to be the primary access device, like a home computer that they own, the only secure way to deliver that workload is via a virtual desktop technology from Citrix or VMware. That sort of solution, which all of the service providers who are sponsoring today's event can help you with. But the better approach is that, like Ed said, invest in the hardware, deliver company-owned equipment for primary devices, and then use mobile device management and mobile application management for those more lightweight tasks on mobile devices like tablets and smartphones. We're out of time. We've covered a lot of ground. We're going to circulate these slides. It's chock full of information today. Hopefully you all appreciate that. And on behalf of our sponsors, ACCI, Amnet, IT Synergy, and Sagacent, I want to thank Ed Correa and Michael Kokenauer for sharing all of their insights. And we look forward to seeing you on another future webinar next quarter. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.